Hello and welcome. Catching up to some extent here with your comments and questions, because I noticed the first comment I come to today dates back around 2 weeks. So if you haven't heard a reply to one of your questions or your comment mentioned, then I will get to it. We'll catch up over the next few days, I'm sure. The first comment, again it says question mark. So I'm not sure what that refers to, because like I've said previously, I don't know which video or maybe comment you are commenting about. Bhante, please. Okay. Bhante, please, the stress out here right now is palpable. We really need more help with coping with the onslaught of advertising. Then it says in brackets, at least 4,000 adverts we see on any given day, consciously or not, close brackets. And people half asleep driving or in the shops, as the attention span is now 8 seconds and falling fast, and all the stress this energy creates in the nervous system, not to mention there's a typo there, not to mention the cost of living, which is astronomical. A dozen eggs costs up to $10. It's a madhouse, and people are not practicing metta, nor kindness, nor patience. We need the voice of sanity. The Buddha, being fully awakened, and the enlightened one, is sanity. All of us, those subsequent to the Buddha whom are not yet enlightened, are the insane. We are the crazies living in the madhouse. That is our choice. No one is inflicting this, as you suggest, upon us directly. We have options. So the Buddha taught two things. There is suffering, there is an end of suffering. And Buddhism is often perceived as being a little pessimistic, or very pessimistic in that respect, being all about suffering, highlighting aging, sickness and death, that inevitability of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and things being out of our control. Because this is the truth. But that was not the words of the Buddha, which were, there is suffering, not you have to suffer. Yes, there is the inevitability of aging, sickness and death for us all. But you don't have to suffer as a result of that. So back to the comment here. The stress here now is palpable, meaning I think that means, if I'm right, it's detectable, it's identifiable. And we need help coping with this onslaught of advertising. To which then you explain there's 4,000 adverts. Now, a moment, as that is the second train. There isn't another train for quite some time, if I remember rightly. Okay. At least 4,000 adverts are seen on any given day, consciously or not. So, the Buddha's words were, there is suffering, not we have to suffer. So, we can identify that which causes suffering, and by that identification, guard our senses, or where possible, avoid adding fuel to the fire, increasing that suffering by not, or by ignoring its cause. Now, it seems to me that you've probably read this. I'm talking directly to the commenter here. Read these figures somewhere. I doubt that you've counted 4,000 adverts or timed everybody's span of attention. Now, there is always going to be suffering out there, as we've talked about in other respects. There always has been, there always will be. There is. This is not you have to, or people have to suffer. It is all up to our own individual choices, the choices we make, whether specifically to guard our senses or not to guard our senses. Now, advertisers are very clever. If not, their advertising agencies are very expert in what they do. Advertisements are directed towards those whom will spend money on what it is that's being promoted, where possible. Now, to some extent, there is some fallout in that you might see advertisements in the background that are not appropriate to your interests. But most probably because you're in a place where the majority are interested in what is being advertised. Now, this can apply to physical locations with billboard advertising, flashing lights, music, sound, whatever's going on, as well as your more focused attention span on what is possibly in front of you, maybe a device of some kind, a smartphone or a tablet or a television, where advertisers have a wonderful opportunity, in their view, to target you directly. Firstly, they know what you're looking at and what you're interested in. They probably know your age group and your spending power, and they can direct that, exploit that specifically, if you allow them to, if you are interested in those subjects, if you are in that area of the media where it is possible for them to do so. If, it is your choice. You do not have to be exposed to. I cannot think of the last advertisement I saw. And only a few days ago, I was in the major city in this country, Colombo, which is just like any other city. Not quite as modern as some, but there is advertising anywhere, everywhere. And I can't say I noticed any of it. Yes, of course, I'm a monk and we're practicing and we're guarding our senses mindfully, continually, all the time, especially when we go out into public. But it doesn't mean we close our eyes and shut our ears, but we focus on walking, stepping right, stepping left, or breathing in, breathing out, or a mantra, Buddho, or the conversation we're having, or the task in hand. Guarding our senses of seeing and hearing, specifically in this case, from that so-called onslaught, which is not an onslaught. Advertisers are not going to waste their money putting stuff in front of you that is clearly not useful, that is clearly inappropriate, intentionally. As I say, if you're unable to turn off advertising, but you want to watch or listen to something, you may have to accept the fact there might be some advertisements prior to and after that event. For instance, this video. Prior to, there may be advertising, because that is out of my control. But all advertising during this video is switched off. We are able to choose not to have advertising relating to our content or during this talk, interrupting it. So that's my choice. Outside of that, you have a choice. Now, it might be expensive in the country you're in, but I use YouTube, for example, just for listening to Dharma talks. Not really so much to watch videos, which is what it was designed for, but it's a useful medium these days to listen to monks and nuns giving Dharma talks in other places, monks and nuns that I'm familiar with, and a useful way for me to listen to Dharma on occasions. And I don't want to be exposed to any form of advertising in order to do that. So I'm fortunate and grateful to your contributions that someone has been able to pay a premium for premium YouTube, that I have no adverts whatsoever. So even if I was to sit in front of watching YouTube for a long period of time, no advertisements, written or video or audio, will appear. And you have that choice also, I think, probably in most media outlets that are available to you. And if that's too expensive, as it might be across the board, then you reduce what you look at. You reduce your interest to one thing like YouTube, or one TV channel like, I don't know, the BBC or whatever it might be, where there is not advertising. Once again, you have choice. So, the primary objective in this practice is to not become attached, and that is also not become attached to our views. And reading between the lines with this comment, it sounds that there's a little resentment and anger there about everyone else's suffering, and a little bit of blame there that everyone is suffering as a result of others and something else rather than their own choices. But that anger, that resentment, that blame is coming from your attachment to your view, which you may see as right view. Yes, the path of practice, the Noble Eightfold Path, is very much the direction to go in to become free from suffering in this lifetime. And yes, out of compassion you may feel for others whom are not doing so. But primarily, your own karma is what belongs to you, so your own practice is what will result in your own freedom from suffering. Here, you're attaching to everyone else's suffering, bringing it into your arena. This is how negative can be perceived. Buddhism can be perceived as negative, thinking that everyone has to suffer and I have to suffer along with them, attaching to everybody else's misery. Whereas if each individual takes care of themselves, not selfishly, but also out of compassion for others, by practicing metta, loving kindness, as you mentioned later, to all beings, then they are setting an example, but also doing their bit for their own reducing, eradication of the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. You cannot stop everyone else's suffering. You cannot guard everyone else's senses. If there is 4,000 adverts in any given day that I've missed, which I have, because I haven't seen one for many days. I can't remember the last advertisement I saw for anything. There are some on billboard, on little posters outside shops, little cafes, and of course this is largely where I'm located. But I do walk into a town each day for Pindapata, and this is, yes, there's a big billboard in the middle of town advertising some form of, I don't know whether it's an electric car or an electric scooter, but I noticed in a corner there was something like, it had Bluetooth or something like that. So yes, an advertisement, but I've really had to think about that to recall the last time I saw an advertisement, because I'm not looking up into the skies at the flashing lights and the billboards. I'm mindfully going about my business, doing my own thing. I'm not engaged in entertainment, so receiving this onslaught of advertisements. And where I have to be, well, not have to be, but choose to listen to Dharma talks, or more particularly what I would listen to is people reading or talking not too much about, but just translating a sutta, which is quite useful. I have it switched off. I've chosen not to have any adverts. Not because I can't ignore them, but it's a waste of time. It's also a waste of data. So what's saved in data, which also costs people who support the Sangha, what's saved in data is more than makes up for what it costs to not have advertising, using data, as a valuable resource. So you have the choice. You've chosen here to get quite animated, let's say, about all this other stuff going on around you. So perhaps choose to guard your senses from it and take care of your own practice rather than worrying about everyone else's. If people's attention span is falling, stress and energy and nervous system struggles, etc., as you say, then you cannot help with that other than by your own example. If you're only associating with Kalyanamita, so like-minded people, for instance, the majority of people listening to this talk, participating in the comment section here, are probably more or less likely to be exposed to those situations you describe. But it is their and each of theirs individual choice to be so. Not for you to say, it's all the fault of another, it's all the fault of the government, it's all the fault of the advertisers, it's all the fault of the companies. There will always be those bodies exploiting greed, hatred and delusion for profit. But you have the choice as to whether to engage with that or not. The cost of living, yes, it's been going up forever and will continue to go up forever. That is what we call inflation. Sometimes it goes up disproportionately and then stops disproportionately. If the price of eggs is $10, I wouldn't know, for a dozen eggs, and that's prohibitively expensive, don't eat eggs. Then you won't need to buy eggs, and you won't need $10 to buy eggs. As can be said for anything else. Now there are certain costs, yes, and you may be just using that as an example, I appreciate. So heating costs, fuel costs, for living in a house, in a town, wherever you might be living. But there are always other areas where you can save. You can budget. You can be more frugal in other areas of expenditure when the cost of the essential cost of living is high. Food is essential, but again, there is always a cheaper way to live. When I was still paying for food before I was a monk, I found actually the cheapest place to feed myself was back in the UK, a relatively expensive country, as compared to the living in India when I was doing both for a while, or Thailand. Because in India and Thailand I would have to go to places where food was already prepared, or it was cheaper to do so, or in order to cook you'd need gas and this, that and the other. And I didn't have the selection. But back in my own country, in the UK, I could go to a large supermarket where they very often would have food for sale that they were clearly making a loss and no profit on to draw in customers. So for instance, I could buy tins of baked beans, which yes, contained a lot of salt and sugar, but essentially were nutritional for less than what they cost to manufacture, I'm sure. Something like 7 pence, less than 10 pence. Ridiculously cheap. And very cheap bread, which might not be your favorite whole grain, super duper, partisan, or whatever it's called, designer bread, but enough to keep you going. Some cheap fat spread to put on it if it's necessary, but it's not. Tinned tomatoes. Pasta was very cheap, whereas pasta in Asian countries is very expensive. Rice not so much, but still even rice was cheaper in my own country as compared to now, here. Now, I'm going back some time, so this could have all changed. But I'm sure there are these baskets you'll find in supermarkets, or boring labels on things that don't attract the eye, that are the cheapest products. So you can budget in that way. You can eat just 1 meal a day, or 2 meals a day at the most. If you're vegan, you won't be eating eggs, you won't be eating dairy products, you won't be eating meat. They are the expensive items in the food basket. The cost of living, the retail price index, is governed on a basket of everyday items, which includes all of those. All of those items that if you're vegan, you wouldn't buy. And therefore, if you're just eating pasta, bread, pulses, beans, you don't have to buy baked beans, but you can buy beans and boil them yourself, dried variety that contain protein, then you can eat very cheaply indeed. Your extravagance can be a jar of Marmite or Vegemite, for instance, to give yourself some vitamin supplements and some B12. So I've done all this, and then it was expensive, not necessarily as it is now, the cost of living, but to me at that time, having reduced my working hours down to the very minimum and doing a job which was just minimum wage, that I could maximize my time for meditation, minimize my time for working, I found a balance there. I wasn't exposed to advertising, even though I was still in the UK. When I go to the airport, I have to walk through the duty-free lounge, which is all of the perfumes and the alcohol and the cigarettes and all of the expensive items and all of the jewelry and the designer companies, electronics that are advertised and sold. I can't remember the last time I saw or thought of an item I think I remember looking for a clock when I was first going to a monastery back in 2015, because I hadn't brought with me a clock or an alarm clock, and you don't have a phone when you first go to stay in a monastery, so they advise bringing some sort of form of clock. And I remember seeing the Swatch watch shop, which was a bit expensive, so I found some cheaper alternative. But I found what I needed, bought it, put it in my bag, and moved on. You too can do this. Practicing, developing compassion for those that haven't found this joyous path yet, because it is joyous when we recognize it is our choice. There is suffering, yes, but we don't have to expose ourselves to it. Are you well versed? This is the next question. So, are you well versed in the Pali Canon? If so, how do you recommend reading it? I would not describe myself as well versed in the Pali Canon, being that I cannot recite it or remember the numbers of each and every sutta applicable to various subjects. However, I have a deep understanding of most of the Sutta Pitaka and a deep understanding of the Vinaya, which is the first basket, the rules, the code of conduct for monks and nuns. How do I recommend reading it? I would recommend you begin with the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. Actually, prior to that, you might start off with the Dhammapada, which comes from the Khuddaka Nikaya, the collection of verses which are extracts from the Sutta Pitaka, which is a good starting point, and your chanting book, which is summaries of a lot of the core teachings in Buddhism contained in the Sutta Pitaka. So start with the chanting book, or book of devotional practices, which summarizes all of the suttas and is a good index system for the suttas. For pleasurable reading, you can read the Dhammapada, which comes from the Pali Canon, the Sutta Pitaka. You can read it in both the Pali language, but primarily you should be reading it in your own language, your mother tongue. And then you can expose yourself to the Pali language most easily by chanting in the Pali language, but with the translation of your own language, either chanted alongside it or read in conjunction with it, in order that you understand what you're chanting. There's no use whatsoever quoting verse after verse in Pali, whether it's chanting or just ordinarily, if you don't understand what you're saying. It might sound good, it might sound clever. It is clever, or to have a memory capacity to do so. But if you don't understand it, it's not pointless, because there are others who hear it who do understand it. But it won't help with your own practice. It's better to get a firm and thorough, deep understanding of the suttas, and then you can chant it in Pali, where you'll be learning the Pali translation, or the original Pali wording of those suttas, or in a form that's more easily manageable. So begin with the chanting book, and then when you progress from that, you can delve into the sutras more deeply, and I would begin with the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya. That's the best place to start, and read it from cover to cover. You can speed read it. You'll get a technique as you read through it. You'll see that most of it is repetitive, and you'll adapt quite quickly to being able to, I would suggest, rather than analyze each verse in the first reading and get into great debate of research, just read through the whole thing quickly to get a firm grounding in the messages there, which are all pointing towards suffering and the end of suffering. And then if you want to go into more in-depth analysis, then you can do that afterwards. Okay. Hi. So this is the next question. I'm trying to put a little gap between each comment and question. In that way, hopefully YouTube will more easily automatically index it, as they do sometimes. You probably didn't need to know that, sorry. Okay. Hi, can I expect 3 to 4 hours of daily meditation upon entry in the Mahabodhi Society? What if I want to focus on being a yogi and want to meditate 6 to 8 hours a day, even more? If I prove to be sincere, will a Mahabodhi Society monastery let me meditate that long? So I was ordained within that organisation, the Mahabodhi Society, and yes, you would be able to, if it was your choice to, meditate for 3 to 4 hours a day, even 6 to 8 hours a day, quite comfortably. There will be other duties, other responsibilities, and on occasions many other activities going on, which might mean you'll have less personal resources. You may be a little tired as a result of that and unable to meditate for such a long time, or at least meditate usefully. You might start dozing off, you might need rest. But you'll soon get used to that. You'll get used to the new routine. You're very well looked after, you're very well fed at the appropriate time. You don't have to worry about your requisites or your accommodation. You don't even have to worry about going on Pindapata in most of those branches. So you've really got a long time to practice or study. It is your choice. So yes to all of those questions with regards to meditation, but it is up to you. There's not group meditation. You have to come here with the rest of the monks and meditate. There may be some of that in some branches, but it is your practice. It is up to you and your own discipline to practice whenever you have the opportunity. There will always be the opportunity there to meditate. Whether you choose to meditate or not is up to you. As for being, you want your focus to be a yogi, I don't know what that is. A yogi can be interpreted as so many different things. If you want to go and live in a Buddhist monastery with a view to ordaining as a Buddhist monk, that is why you should go and live in a Buddhist monastery, with a view to ordaining as a Buddhist monk. Unless you're just going for a specific period of time to provide service or for your own personal meditation retreat, that's the only reason to go to a Buddhist monastery. The word yogi would not be used or mentioned, not for any, it doesn't have any negative connotations, but it's a practice, another practice of another philosophy, another religion, something else, something different. Yogic practices relating to something else. You will be maintaining sila, developing samadhi, and developing panya. Moral virtue, meditation, and wisdom. No other words are necessary. So, yes, if you prove to be sincere, after some time, you will have the opportunity, hopefully, to ordain, and I wish you well with that. So, I want to ask, next question. I want to ask, is it okay if I don't seek renunciation nor liberation? Yep, if you don't want to become enlightened, nobody's going to really mind. No one's saying that it's essential for everybody to seek enlightenment or become Buddhist or anything else for that matter. And although it goes on to a long explanation, after that question about you wanting to do this, that and the other, smoke a little, drink a little, but you still observe the Dharma and are interested in it, well, if you can't keep the 5 precepts, then you're not really seriously practicing. So you're not going to be liberated or become enlightened. So this, the first step really is to develop a foundation of sila, moral virtue, which entails keeping all 5 of the precepts. You'll notice I'm very strict on this in terms of the way I speak. I mean, people can do what they like, but I'm just saying from my own experience, you cannot just have a little bit of intoxicants from time to time to be sociable. Stimulants are different, coffee, tea, we've spoken about that many times before, but anything that dulls the mind, dulls the senses, alcohol or drugs, unless prescribed for a specific reason by a medical doctor, they are to be not just avoided, refrained from completely. So I was wrong, here's another train. Must be a busy day. Yeah, so I did read your entire comment, but I'm not going to read it all out now because it's just completely contradictory to what the Buddha teaches. You're just wanting to do a little bit of Buddhism to be a Buddhist, but you're not really prepared to do the work. And there is work in refraining from certain things in order to keep the precepts. It's not much work because there's nothing to do, it's just not doing some things that you enjoy doing, but those things cannot accompany your practice. Okay. So this begins with very good video, thank you so much. So dear Bhante D, very good video, thank you so much. I'll say that because I don't know what the video is and I don't know what the question is that's coming up. Let's have a look. I have a question for you. As a monk, you may not use artificial intelligence and may not be particularly familiar with it. You're right there. Although I would say I consider my own intelligence as artificial. If I have any whatsoever, it's artificial. It's been put there. I wasn't born with it. But I was born with human nature containing both defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, and also the Brahma Viharas of loving kindness, compassion, joy and equanimity. I was born with those attributes. You don't need, and everyone is, defilements and qualities. Anything else that's gained through intellectual learning and study is artificial intelligence, whether it's on a computer, in a data bank, or in your thinking brain. So I'm familiar with that, my own artificial intelligence. All I learned throughout my lay life was artificial. None of it was real. What was there that was real was the result of previous lives that caused me to be born into the human realm with not only the good things, loving kindness, compassion, joy and equanimity, but also the bad things reminiscent of that, having not destroyed them in previous lifetimes. Greed, hatred and delusion. Anyway, continuing, I would like to seek your perspective on this matter. Do you think it would be better to avoid using this type of technology, given that it is artificial and not directly grounded in lived experience? So I think I've answered it, haven't I, that question, by what I've just said. I think where it's appropriate, I've used it unintentionally, because if I pick up this device and turn it on, and have any question about it for the purpose of making these videos, I Google that question and it just automatically gives me an answer, which I understand is sourced through AI, artificial intelligence. But that's no different to 10 years ago, when one would search on the internet for something, coming from all the information that's been put on there, collected up as a resource for people to access. And that is no different from when we used to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. But you're quite right, I don't have an understanding of artificial intelligence, and I'm sure it goes far deeper than that. But what is important is your intention. If your intention is to find an answer to a question, you need to know, what does 1 + 1 equal? Then you can ask, what does 1 + 1 equal? And use that answer 2 for your benefit, and therefore the intention is useful. If it's for speculation, speculative ideas, I can only see it leading to more suffering, where you're speculating on suffering, on subject matter that is not useful. Like we were talking about with regards to imponderable questions and subject matter that is not useful to speculate on. You could ask all of those questions of AI, and I'm sure it would come up with a huge variety of answers. But this would not be useful because it cannot be verified. Only through your own practice and experientially can these answers be found. So where you can, just, avoid this. It's once again, we can guard our senses and choose what we do. Okay, I am 42. Only just got my life together after being... Sometimes I think I should read these before. Okay. So I was around 42, yes, when I began to get my life together, because I suppose that's when I started meditation back then. Maybe a bit before there. I think it was around 40. I can't quite remember. Buddhism, it was a bit later, but meditation I started a long time before Buddhism. I'll start again. This question, right. I'm 42, only just got my life together after being a pothead for 20 years. Now I crave a wife and kids, but I'm too old to find someone to have kids with. I see families having fun, and I'm so jealous. I don't know how to get past this. Okay. Now, firstly, if you've been a pothead for 20 years, it's going to take some time. But I'm really happy that you are now getting your life together, or let's say your life is coming together as a result of you getting yourself together. People say, don't they, pull yourself together, man. I don't think you're really politically correctly allowed to say such a thing to someone now, but it's a very appropriate thing to say in most cases. Come on, pull yourself together. Meaning, gather yourself up. We're gathering up what are just the 5 khandhas, your physical body and all that goes with that. Feelings, recollection, mental formations, and what we're experiencing through sense consciousness. In other words, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, the 5 khandhas. Pull yourself together means get those all together again. They've gone in this direction, that direction, everything's disbanded, broken, falling apart. And you feel that way, don't you? If you've been smoking pot for 20 years, you're going to feel bad. Even when you smoke pot, you're not going to feel good. It won't work anymore. It's just a habit just to maintain some kind of equilibrium with life. Eventually, this will fade away, be gone. And you'll experience the harsh realities of life. As those khandhas come back together, you'll see more clearly through sense contact the experience of suffering. But you will also, if you're in conjunction with that practicing by keeping moral virtue and practicing meditation, develop the wisdom to see clearly the cause of that karma. And in this instance, you're highlighting it already without seeing it for what it is, as being desire to have something that you don't have, or for things to be another way. For instance, you feel you're old at 42 and you wish it was otherwise. Well, I know, and myself, I'm not sure how old I was when I was last in a relationship, but you can very easily at the age of 42, and I know many people whom have formed new relationships and even had new families. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do that, because that's just another whole realm of suffering you're opening up there. Whereas you could better dedicate your remaining life, of which you're not even halfway through. You're middle-aged these days at 42, that's all. You've got a long way to enjoy a very fruitful existence in many other ways other than just being in a relationship, in a nuclear family of 2.4 children and a dog and a semi-detached home in suburbia, if that even exists these days. That's what used to be on the back of a packet of cornflakes as the ideal life when I was a child, and what we aspired to. And possibly for a lot of us now, couldn't think of anything worse, albeit comfortable and routine. But you can find that refuge and that comfort, that security of routine, in the refuge of the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which is what we're talking about here. Jealousy is just wanting what you see on the face of it as as something for your own. Do you really want another body laying next to you, excreting, getting dirty, disturbing you when you want peace? Do you really want to be woken in the early hours of the morning by crying babies, to change their nappies, to constantly have to feed them? Do you really want to go to work for 12 hours a day, to earn money just to get enough money to heat the house, buy the $10 dozen eggs, as was mentioned earlier, that's why I say that, clothe the family? Do you really want that? Or could you just find contentment in something more simple, a more simple life? Ask yourself these questions. Now is not the time if you've only just stopped smoking pot, but if it's been a few months, and even better, once it's been a few years, everything will come back together. That's not to say that we rely on what comes back together, because all conditioned things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and out of our control. So those 5 khandhas also, the rupa, the physical body, and the thinking brain, will deteriorate. We will age, we will get sick, and we will die. But we can use that vehicle for the expansion and development of our minds, and those qualities within our minds that are inherent within us of compassion, of loving kindness, joy, and equanimity through this practice. So keep listening, and then you will get past this feeling. It's just wanting something you don't have. But if you had it, you'd probably want something else. It's only because you don't have it currently and you see it as normal. There is no normal. And it would not be normal for you to want to expose yourself to that whole additional realm of suffering. Now, I'm not saying that that is the case for everybody in relationships. I too, prior to being a monk, in a previous life within this life, was married with children whom are now long grown up and leading their own lives. So I'm talking to you from a place of experience. That wasn't where I found ultimately contentment. I have lots of photographs of the water pump there. We don't want to look at those now. Okay. So this is Bante. Would you say that you are just enjoying life instead of practicing? So if you say you're practicing and you're not enjoying life, you're not practicing correctly. There's no right or wrong, but the whole purpose of this practice is to develop contentment and develop these qualities I was just talking about, but is towards happiness. So yes, I'm really enjoying life, a life of simplicity, contentment, and resulting from that, happiness. And that is my practice. Now, it took a long time to get there. Arduous, hard work, long hours of meditation. And that still goes on. That is still my practice. But I'm also enjoying the benefits, the fruit of that practice, in that I'm able to live more or less anywhere that I'm put with contentment, unaffected by what's going on around me. And often when we have no other cravings and desires for something that is other than it is, then what falls in your lap just naturally is quite the ideal. If you strive for what you see here, you might not get it, because that is wanting what you don't have, or wanting things to be otherwise. But if you let go of those preconceived ideas, views that you've become attached to as being what is a monk's life or a nun's life or a practitioner's life, but just do what the Buddha teaches us to do, that is moral virtue, meditation, and developing wisdom, then the rest will follow. And that is my experience. And that is what I'm sharing with you here. Save your pennies. Adopt a very strict budget, a very strict regime of practice, of meditation. Keep the 8 precepts if you can for as many days a week as possible, and this will certainly help towards saving money. Not to accumulate money, but to use that money to come here. Find some accommodation nearby to stay, or go and stay in a meditation center here in Sri Lanka. And see for yourself that yes, you'll really enjoy life. And it is the practice. I really enjoy giving, generosity, which I'm able to do here every day. I'm also very much able to enjoy receiving dana, other people's generosity towards me. So each day I'm given an abundance of food, and I only need a little, and each day I'm able to give an abundance of food, of which there is a lot, to many other people. I go to the local government hospital and give food each morning, so it's just one meal, their breakfast, to each and every one of the patients, and more often than not also the staff there. I so much enjoy that practice. Yes, so it's not a holiday and an enjoyment like you might imagine, but it is a very enjoyable life. I'd say that's perhaps the most enjoyable part of my day, giving. when I go to the hospital wards. Even though I'm quite tired, worn out, I've started early, I've walked a long way, I've chanted a lot of blessings to a lot of people, which I enjoy doing also, but it's physically tiring, mentally tiring, giving all of yourself to as many others on a route as you possibly can. And of course, being open to receiving what they have to offer. But somehow the energy is there again, always, to go and then visit the hospital to redistribute all this kindness, passing it on. You never run out of that energy because it's coming from a good place. You might be exhausted later, but that comes much later. And even then, very seldomly. I come back here, I've got just enough food for myself. If there's still some surplus, some more to give to others locally. Or more locally, I should say. It's all quite local. Then I have my meal. Then I have the rest of the day for my practice. Or meditation, if that's what you're referring to. And occasionally, which I very much enjoy, another part of enjoying life, is when people come here to visit. So I encourage you to do that. There are other places in Sri Lanka where you can go on meditation retreats, for instance. If your budget is limited, where it costs very little to stay. I don't have accommodation here, other than for meditation and visiting people to receive guests of that nature, but there is local accommodation that is relatively cheap, and even more so out of season, which here is most of the year. This is the peak tourist season at the moment, which only lasts a few months. And this part of Sri Lanka, it's hardly noticeable. I see a few tourists if I go out later on in the day, as I had to the other day to go to Colombo, in this area. But not many, not like some places. I've got to really look for them. There's a foreigner, forgetting that I'm a foreigner too. Because after all, I'm a tourist here as much as anyone else. It's just I've been here for a very long time now. So, come and visit. I encourage you all to do so. And finally, this is a comment which is completely contrary to the previous comment, but I will stress it's from a different contributor, okay? So, the first person seemed to think I was enjoying myself too much, maybe, although I was maybe making that assumption. It's just the tone of the comment. And this is completely the opposite. What a stupid, depressing, boring life is the life you are living. No comment. There is really nothing. You might think it's stupid, that's your opinion, but there's certainly nothing depressing, nothing boring about this life that I'm really enjoying, as the previous commenter was highlighting, who seemed to think I was enjoying it maybe rather too much. You can't enjoy life too much. We should enjoy it to the maximum. This is the happy channel, okay? We're to be happy if we're listening to these Dharma talks. That's the point. Not to make people miserable. By being in touch with the characteristics of existence, understanding them, having a deep understanding and acceptance of inevitability of aging, sickness and death, we can then put it aside and enjoy the time we have. Using this opportunity to guard our senses from that is unnecessary and focus on what we can. The simplicity of contentment leading to happiness and ultimately nibbana. So on that note, if there's something useful, please use it. If not, just let it go. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.